Can Africa truly finance its own future? For decades, African leaders have spoken about African unity, sovereignty, economic liberation, and self-reliance. The speeches are powerful. The symbolism is powerful. The rhetoric is inspiring. But today we need to ask a difficult question. Can Africa truly claim sovereignty when the African Union still depends heavily on foreign funding? And if Africa is serious about independence, why has it struggled so much to finance its own continental institutions? Today we are going to examine the history of AU financing, the Kigali reform plan, and why the 0.2% levy became controversial. How did World Trade Organization and regional blocs complicated implementation? Why Africa's largest economies must do more, and how the EU could potentially raise tens of billions of dollars annually without surrendering control to the continent's biggest states. Because this discussion is not only about money, it is about the future of Pan-Africanism itself. Before the African Union existed, Africa had the Organization of African Unity, or OAU. During the 1960s and 1970s, African leaders understood something important. Political independence without economic independence is incomplete. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah repeatedly warned that Africa could not become truly sovereign if it remained economically fragmented and externally dependent. Leaders like Muammar Gaddafi pushed for a stronger continental financial integration and independent African institutions. But despite the rhetoric, the organization, the OAU struggled financially for decades. Many states pay their dues late, paid partially, or in those obligations entirely. The organization consistently suffered from budget shortfalls. As a result, many programs remained weak. Continental institutions lacked capacity, and Africa's integration moved slowly. Then in 2002, the African Union replaced the OAU with a far bigger ambition. The AU wanted continental integration, stronger peacekeeping, infrastructure coordination, economic harmonization, and eventually even an African financial institutions. But all these things require one thing: money. A tremendous amount of money. Over time, the AU became heavily dependent on outside support. Organizations like the European Union, the United Nations, the World Bank, and various Western governments began funding major AU operations. At one point, foreign donors financed the majority of AU programs and peace initiatives. This created a serious contradiction. African leaders spoke passionately about sovereignty, while outsiders financed large portions of African institutions. Critics began asking, how independent can the African Union truly be if much of its operational budget comes from outside of Africa? This became especially visible during peacekeeping operations. Many AU security missions rely heavily on foreign funding, foreign logistics, foreign intelligence, and foreign transportation systems. In other words, Africa's political ambition had expanded much faster than its financial capacity. Then came the Kigali Reform Plan in 2016. At the summit in Kigali, reform championed by Paul Kagame attempted to fundamentally change AU financing. At the center of the reform was the 0.2% levy, input levy. The idea was simple. Every African country could place a small levy on eligible imports entering from outside Africa. The money could then help finance the AU independently. This was historically important because previous calls for self-financing were mostly theoretical, but Kigali introduced a real financing mechanism. The goals were reduce donor dependency, strengthen AU autonomy, create predictable revenue, and build African ownership of African institutions. If truly implemented, the levy was expected to generate over $1 billion annually. But implementation quickly became complicated. Many people ask, how could a tiny 0.2% levy create so much problems? Because international trade systems are extremely complex. Let me give that to the African leaders. Many countries or many states belong to the WTO, and under WTO agreements, countries commit to tariff ceilings, trade rules, and customs obligations. Some governments fear that adding the AU levy could violate existing trade commitments. For example, if a country already operated near its maximum WTO trade, that's the tariff ceiling, adding another charge could technically create legal complications. Governments fear trade disputes, investor uncertainty, and retaliation from major trading partners. But regional customs union created far even bigger problems. Organizations such as Saudi African Customs Union, Economic Community of West African States, the East African Community, and Common Market of East and Saudi Africa already operate coordinated trade systems. Take a SACU for example. Countries inside SACU share customs revenues collectively. That means Namibia cannot independently impose a new tariff. Botswana cannot act alone. And Lesotho cannot suddenly alter import structures without regional approval. Everything requires collective agreements. Then came domestic concerns. Finance ministers, on the other hand, worried the levy might increase inflation, raise food prices, and hurt fragile economies heavily dependent on import. Remember, many African countries import machinery, medicine, fuel, industrial equipment, and food products. So even a small levy becomes politically sensitive. Now, here is the most important part of this discussion. The future of AU financing depends heavily on Africa's largest economies, like countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and Algeria. Carry enormous economic weight. If these countries fully commit to AU financing reforms, the AU changes fundamentally. But many hesitated. The big countries hesitated. Somebody argued that the AU must improve accountability first. That I agree with. But I think it should come second, because we have been in this forever. Others fear loss of fiscal sovereignty, expanding AU bureaucracy, and automatic continental taxation problem. That was some of their fear. But this raises another difficult question. If Africa's largest economies are unwilling to seriously finance continental institutions, who exactly is supposed to carry the burden? Smaller economies cannot sustain the AU alone. Here is something many people do not fully understand. Even if every AU member fully implemented the Kigali levy, it still may not be enough for Africa's long-term ambitions. Africa's needs are massive. The continent needs infrastructure, industrialization, continental rail systems, energy integration, food security systems, advanced universities, technological development, and stronger peacekeeping forces. These projects require tens of billions of dollars annually, not just hundreds of millions. Which brings us to a much larger idea, right? What if AU members contributed a percentage of annual budgets directly to the AU? Suppose all AU states contributed 2% of national government spending. Africa's combined government budget are estimated in the trillions of dollars. So, under a serious continental financing framework, I mean serious now, the AU could potentially raise between $45 to $70 billion annually. that could completely transform the African Union. The AU could suddenly possess the financial capacity to independently fund peacekeeping, build continental infrastructure, support industrialization, finance emergency responses, and reduce dependency on outside donors. But then another problem emerges. How could you prevent Africa's biggest economies from dominating the AU once they become the largest financial contributors? And this is where institutional reform becomes critical. If the AU ever, I'm saying ever, reach a financing level between 45 to 70 billion dollars annually, the money could need strict governance system. I agree. Otherwise, corruption, inefficiency, and political favoritism could destroy the entire project. Here are some of my ideas on how such a system could work. The first step one could be cap administrative spending. No more than 10% of AU revenue should go towards salaries, travel, conferences, and AU bureaucracy. That means the overwhelming majority of funds must go directly into development and security projects. Step two could be create independent continental funds. You could have separate financing institutions. Separate financing institutions should be established for infrastructure, energy, agriculture, education, technology, and peacekeeping. Each fund should operate independently with public audit, anti-corruption oversight, and transparent procurement systems. Step three will be prioritize infrastructure integration. A large percentage of funding should target rail corridors, highways, electricity grids, digital infrastructure, and ports connecting African economies. Because without physical integration, African economic integration remains incomplete. Step four, build an independent African security capacity. What do I mean by that? The AU could fully finance the African Standby Force, anti-terrorism coordination, intelligence sharing, border security, and peacekeeping operations. This could reduce dependency on foreign military funding. 5, establish an African sovereign investment system. Part of AU revenue could be invested into African development banks, industrial projects, technology startups, and strategic mineral processing. Instead of simply spending money, Africa could build long-term continental wealth. So how do we prevent domination by large economies. I said it before, if Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria pay the bulk of the money, how do you prevent them from dominating the organization? One of the ways, or some of the ways that we can prevent that from happening, because if that becomes to happen, smaller states will will be in fear. And that concern from smaller states is legitimate. So safeguards could be necessary. First, one country, one vote. Regardless of financial contribution, every member state should retain equal voting rights in co-AU political decisions. This prevents wealthier states from directly purchasing political control. In the United States, Delaware, one of the smallest states, the population of Delaware is less than the population of Philadelphia. Second, supermajority voting. Major decisions should require regional consensus and supermajority voting. What do I mean by that? That prevents a few large economies from controlling the AU alone. Third, independent oversight bodies. Continental anti-corruption and audit agency must remain institutionally independent from major powers. Audits should be public and mandatory. Fourth, regional balance requirements. Regional balance requirements. Key AU leadership positions should rotate regionally between West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, and Central Africa. This reduces concentration of influence. Fifth, contribution caps on political influence. Financial contributions should never automatically translate into additional political authority. Otherwise, the AU risks replicating the same power imbalances, say in many global institutions. The real problem is political will. The real problem is political will. Here is the bigger reality, the deeper reality. Here is the deeper reality. Africa probably possesses enough wealth and resources to finance much stronger continental institutions. The continent is rich in oil, gas, strategic minerals, agriculture, and human capital. The real challenge may not be economic capability. It may be political will. Because real sovereignty requires sacrifice. Real sovereignty requires discipline. Real sovereignty requires accountability. Real sovereignty requires long-term thinking. Participation in WTO matters. Regional trade blocks matters. International partnerships matters. No serious person is arguing Africa should isolate itself from the world. But there is a difference between partnership and dependency. And too often, African institutions still operate within the systems of dependency. The Kigali reform plan reveals something important. Africa's biggest economy is not, Africa's biggest problem is not the lack of ideas. Africa's biggest problem is implementation. For generations, African leaders have spoken about unity, sovereignty, and self-reliance. But sovereignty is expensive. And unless African governments, especially the continent's largest economies, are willing to sacrifice, are willing to seriously invest in continental institutions, Pan-Africanism may remain more theoretical than practical. The question is no longer whether Africa can finance itself. The real question is whether African leaders are willing to build the institutions necessary to make that possible. When the dust settles, that may determine whether the African Union becomes a truly independent continental power or remains trapped between ambition and dependency. Folks, my name is Pico Conway. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe. I will talk to you next week. Bye for now.